Jake.
I'm Tom.
We are Velocities in Music. On this podcast, Tom and I discuss a treasure trove of topics pertaining to modern music, including artist deep dives and monthly and annual new music wrap-ups. Our last two podcasts, we featured our top albums of 2016 and our top songs of 2016. We also asked you guys to give us albums that we didn't cover during the year that you would like to hear from us about. Today, we bring you our 2016 misses and mentions. Albums we missed from 2016 that we'd like to give an honorable mention and recommend for you. Before we get started, you can help support Velocities in Music. Subscribe to Velocities in Music on your favorite podcasting device to automatically get our latest podcast episode sent to your device for your listening pleasure. Also, Velocities in Music does not want your money. We also don't want to introduce ads into the podcast yet. Right now, all we want is for you to share Velocities in Music with family or friends whom you feel would benefit from joining in on the music discussion Tom and I are trying to create in every podcast. Tom,
yes,
2016 is done.
It is.
And this podcast marks the last podcast covering 2016.
Yep.
And it's early 2017 right now.
Yep.
But all of our fans out there who watch our videos, who listen to the podcast, they have sent us Facebook messages, they've sent us emails, they have written comments on our YouTube videos, and now we have a list of albums that we just didn't cover.
Yeah, it's like having a bonus month, like a 13th month.
It is
the
the 13th month, and I actually feel good about it because we really don't do anything in December.
No,
because like 5 albums come out in December.
Right.
Now,
some of them were pretty good though.
Yeah, there were several pretty key releases in December this year. We could have done an extra podcast. I don't think it would have been.
But
enough.
You know what? Those albums were still in the running for our best of the year, and some of them I think made like our top 70 or 100, but just didn't crack our top like 20 that we covered in our podcast.
That's true. We'll cover those tonight in our featured album and honorable mention section, and actually how we cover the 2016 Misses and Mentions podcast. I think that we're going to dive in by jumping into albums from the year that we'd like to feature for you. Now, we'll give you guys a little bit of background as why we didn't cover this during the year, and maybe why these albums didn't show up on our end of year list, or maybe they did, and we didn't cover it in the podcast. We'll give you some of that background and just give you our thoughts on the album. After we go through about 10 or so featured albums, we'll go through several other honorable mentions, and we'll just cover those at a high level, give you guys a quick sound clip of those songs or those albums so you can hear them for yourselves and decide if you want to go check them out. So let's get started.
Let's do it. For our first featured album that we missed in 2016, we're going to start with a big one, Beyonce's Lemonade.
I am the dragon, breathe the fire. Beautiful man, I'm the lion. Beautiful man, I know you're lying. I am not broken, I'm not crying, you ain't trying.
This was topping a lot of critics' charts, and I can see why. Beyonce, is taking her pop R&B sound and just making it much more artistic than it has been in the past. She's also infusing just a lot of raw emotion and even anger into the music, which is not something that certainly not something you heard much from Destiny's Child, but it's something that she's been playing around with more on some of her recent albums, and I think with Lemonade, she really nails it. There's a lot of good guest spots here, too. A song featuring Jack White, that was probably one of my favorite ones, but, while I really liked this album, it's not one of my preferred styles, but I can see why people were loving it.
And why didn't we cover it back in April when it came out?
It just wasn't really available to stream anywhere. I ended up buying it, but yeah. I wanted, there's always something else to listen to. And it's kind of to the point where, in 2016, we're thinking more about convenience than anything. There's something else that we could listen to more conveniently, than maybe we'll cover that. But of course, this is an album that by the end of the year, I wanted to make sure we got back to, and I'm glad I did because I really enjoyed it.
I thought that while Lemonade is a pop album at its core, you can hear all sorts of other genres seeping into the sound, such as hip-hop, soul, and rock. The production on this album is fantastic. Everything sounds full and very lush, but never over the top. This accentuates Beyonce's vocal performance and all of the backing sonic elements. And when I came into this, I expected Beyonce's vocal performance to be top-notch, and it is, but what surprised me is that rarely on Lemonade did I find her to be belting it out in traditional pop chorus fashion. Instead, I hear her really trying to emote through her vocals, which gives the sound an emotional warrant for these tracks to really come off as authentic. I agree some of the songs are stronger than others, but I never found any to truly bring down the listening experience. This is a very well-executed record from both a scope and a performance perspective. Following Beyonce Lemonade, we have Beyonce Knowles' younger sister Solange with her album A Seat at the Table.
Thought a new dress would make it better. I tried to work it away, but that just made me even sadder.
This is such a delicate sound, both in instrumentation and Solange's vocal performance. Solange has a great voice. It's as pretty as it is emotive, which helps her perfectly parlay the starkly contrasting lyrical content in an effective manner. I get an 80s vibe in the production mixed with some traditional R&B and hip-hop, which surprisingly works quite well. The lyrical content is where this album really shines, but the whole listening experience is just very well done. My biggest complaint is that the overall experience falls a little bit flat. I think A Seat at the Table could have benefited from a couple of key tracks that either show as highlights or provide some sort of emotional or dynamic intensity.
Yeah, I liked this album a lot, particularly from an album flow perspective. It's really a seamless listen, and I like that there's a larger social statement being made that works into the tracks and even between them that helps with that album flow as well. You know, we just got done talking about Beyonce's album, and I think these two sisters, you know, these two albums were topping a lot of lists, in either order even. And I think that there's just something to be said for that. You can tell that these two, their experience with music growing up, their experience being black women in America growing up has really helped to shape this music. And in terms of conveying a message, they just do a phenomenal job. I think it just comes down to taste, which one you'll end up liking better. I ended up liking Beyonce's a little bit better. Sure. But at the same time, I think that Solange actually made a slightly more artistic and meaningful record. So, I mean, you got to give your hats off to both of these ladies. Next up, we have Blonde by Frank Ocean.
I'm skipping showers and switching socks, sleeping good and long, bones feeling dense as fuck, wish a nigga would.
A lot of people have been asking us about this album. This was a really big release in 2016. Also, is it Blonde with an E? Without an E? I don't know. Depends on if you trust the album artwork or where the album is cataloged in its official name.
And on the album artwork, doesn't he have green hair?
He does. No, it's very mysterious.
Yeah. It's throwing me off.
It is. So Frank Ocean here, he continues to have an experimental approach to his genre of R&B, making it really smooth, focusing on different elements than a lot of R&B artists do, especially here with the rhythm, which I really appreciate his creativity there. He's not following pop trends in structure or an instrumental palette or production style. Nothing is over-compressed or mixed to be in-your-face and aggressive here, which is necessary for smooth-sounding R&B like this. There is a noticeable lack of percussive elements on this album, making it have less driving momentum, more mood, and a clear focus on Frank's vocal performance, melodies, and lyrics. That was the big defining thing to me, is I'm like, where are the big beats and stuff? You'd have like 4 or 5 tracks in a row that just barely have any beat, just some swirling synths and Frank's very, very tight vocal performance. So there's a lot of subtlety and tact here, which makes for a solid album experience, even if it doesn't have the more memorable highlights that Channel Orange had. And that's the big defining difference to me. Channel Orange had some great single tracks, some great highlights, whereas this one just flows.
Yeah, this feels more like a holistic experience, but you're right, it does lack that defining like couple of tracks to really key in on the album. And I find that more and more albums that I fall in love with need to be good straight through listen, but they also have to have a couple of those really key tracks. Channel Orange had that, this doesn't. I still think Blonde is very good. I remember when we talked about Channel Orange a number of years ago, Tom, we were like the phrase, tongue-in-cheek phrase that was going around about Frank Ocean's music was PBR&B. And when I listened to this, you know, when you're talking about how this album didn't have as many like beats or anything, it had a lot of swirling synths and it would just go 5 tracks in a row like that. It really hit me that like he's going for more of a Bon Iver sort of sound. And that sort of like atmospheric, very emotive side of R&B. So it's kind of cool how he's infusing modern, almost indie elements into this as well, just to create something that's pretty unique and original. Next, we have Childish Gambino, Awaken My Love. Now, we missed this record because it came out in December. This is one of those few records that came out in December that was worth covering that we really didn't get a chance to. Tom and I did listen to Awaken My Love in preparation for our end-of-the-year top albums of VIM's top albums of 2016 list. And I think it actually made it pretty high up.
Yeah, I think it was in our top 70 that we posted on our website, just not the top 20.
Just not the top 20 we featured in the podcast. So anyways, this is Childish Gambino, or Donald Glover, by the way, not related in any way to Danny Glover.
Yeah.
But still, you have that. This guy is just an artist. He's involved in a lot of things, a lot of different films and other art media. But what we really come back to is his music. Tom and I started listening to Childish Gambino in 2011, and with his first album Camp came out, and then in 2013 his second album Because the Internet came out in December, and we didn't cover it, but I think you might have listened to it, Tom. I'm not sure if I did.
It showed his hip hop style becoming even more progressive than from Camp, becoming a little more insightful and also a little more critical of just media and the world. And I mean, look at the album title, right?
Right. And now in 2016, December, we have Awaken My Love. If you had put this on and told me that it was Parliament, I would have believed you.
Amen.
Childish Gambino has branched out beyond the world of hipster hop and created an album that feels very timeless. It's great to see an artist unafraid to do something completely different and less acceptable in the mainstream for the sake of making an artistic statement. My biggest complaint is that this album is front heavy, but we may have our first top album candidate of December.
Yeah, it came out early in December and I was loving it for the rest of the month. And coming off of us talking about Frank Ocean and Solange and Beyonce, I just want to point out that these 4 artists, they have a strong following.
Oh, yeah.
The mainstream is following where they're going. Maybe to a slightly lesser extent, Childish Gambino than the other 3, but Childish Gambino made an even larger jump in style with this one. And I love what these 4 have done, because what they've done is they've turned pop and R&B and hip hop into something so much more artistic than what a lot of their contemporaries are doing. Yeah, it's music that can be popular and still make you think. And I can't wait to see the kind of impact that this will have on mainstream music, because I think it really could. I think that if other artists are listening to these and seeing that not only are these albums selling, but they're critically acclaimed, they're showing up on end of the year lists, I think it's going to force a lot of people to step up their game. Plus, like, Childish Gambino, Donald Glover on Awaken My Love, I mean, this isn't even a hip-hop album.
Right.
He's not just infusing different sounds. It was a true genre jump.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I love that. And he pulled it off. He made it work really well. I just can't wait to see how that not only impacts their future music, but the future of music in general, because I really think that it could. Next up, we're going to talk about an album that came out right at the very end of 2016.
They're killing us.
Yeah.
They're killing us when they do that.
Well, it's Killer Mike and LP.
Yeah.
Run the Jewels, Run the Jewels 3.
This album, I can say, I'm pretty confident did not make it on to many other sites' lists.
Because they had already posted them by the time it came out.
Because they post their lists in early December. How can anything make the list?
Yeah, and I listened to it before we did our podcast, but I honestly wasn't too moved by it. I do think it's still very good. I still think that Run the Jewels is one of the best hip-hop groups out there, but just not quite this album wasn't quite enough to crack my list. But anyway, it's just nice to have them back, and they are biting as ever. LP and Killer Mike, they have this message about how the society sucks, and they want you to know how pissed they are about it. As usual, the delivery here is aggressive and impressive, with both of these guys spitting fire throughout the record. The beats are a little less techno-electronica influenced, sticking to simpler hip-hop beats that feel more modern and inner city than post-apocalyptic Warzone type stuff that we kind of got on their last couple albums. But RTJ3 comes in a little bit longer at 53 minutes, and not surprisingly, there are a couple tracks that feel significantly weaker than the rest of the album. That's going to happen on longer albums. Hip-hop is really guilty of this. But most notably, Panther Like a Panther. That song didn't really do a whole lot for me. Still, this is a good offering from a great hip-hop duo and certainly worth a listen.
And one thing I would add on to that, because I've listened to this a number of times, the more I listen to this, the more I realize that the lyrical content, I'm starting to feel a shift. This is about like 50% the politically charged message that RTJ has gotten really popular for, but also about 50% a mixture of banging women and being very proud of the RTJ's accomplishments. And I could do without the 50% lyrical content that's all about them, and more 50% content that's all about, commenting on our society and why we need to care about this stuff. Like, that's the part where I feel like their lyrics and their vocal delivery really resonates with the music that they're making. And I feel like the other stuff just dilutes their message with all this other garbage. I don't need them to prop themselves up. I already think they're awesome. It's just kind of a waste of space to me. Following RTJ3, we have another hip-hop album.
Yes.
Kind of in the same vein. Aesop Rock, The Impossible Kid.
I used to hang around with rappers at the root of the scene. It meant a lot to feel the fugitive community breathe. Maybe the sentimental us to be truly naive. I know some shit about your heroes that you wouldn't believe. I think we're all a bunch of weirdos on a quest to believe.
This album is Aesop Rock's 7th studio album, and this came out back in April. And back in 2012, we covered his 6th album, Skeleton, and we loved it.
Yeah,
I mean,
great
that
album.
was just one of the best records of the year. I've come back to it several times. Tom, I know that you've been loving on that album for a long time. So we were really excited to hear that this album came out. Unfortunately, we just didn't cover it during the year, and it didn't make our end-of-year list, and I can kind of tell you why. This didn't hit a lot of people's lists. Critics just didn't love this just as much, and I can kind of see why after listening to it, although I did end up liking this album. This is modern hip-hop with faster-paced beats and a lot of electronic effects to give it this digitalized feel, paired with authentic-sounding bass riffs to ground out the sound. The beats and production really give this a nice blend of futuristic and traditional hip-hop beats. The lyrical delivery, as always, is sharp, but not as biting and as aggressive as I remember Skeleton being. The strength of this record is in Aesop's Rock lyrics, and which seem to catch my ear and draw me in on every track. Overall, I think this album's very well done, but it doesn't come close to Skeleton.
Yet another hip-hop release from 2016 that passed us by, but we had a lot of people tell us about, was Ka with Honor Killed the Samurai.
Surprised by my career, thought I'd be career criminal. Hood D squeeze you lifeless, let you part of the strangle. Should be dead from karma, don't work harder than my guardian angel. If you evoke threats for prestige, don't fest. Want a juice or got loose, fresh squeeze, cold press.
In style, in terms of hip-hop, this feels to me like kind of a like low-key Wu-Tang project, actually. The beats are kind of grainy and sound like something out of a film. And then, of course, there's the spoken clips talking about samurais. I mean, if that doesn't reek of Wu-Tang, what does, right? Ka, though, he has a great flow as a rapper, and I love the mixing of everything on this album. Overall, I wasn't too roped in by it, but it's pretty damn good, and I can see why people were loving on this album. As far as underground hip-hop goes, I mean, this was a really good effort.
Next up, we have Cult of Luna with Julie Christmas. Cult of Luna's 7th studio album, Mariner. Cult of Luna is a Swedish heavy metal band, and they even borderline on post-metal at times. First thing you hear on Mariner, heavy, devastating guitar and bass. The wall of sound approach to metal gives this a noise or industrial edge. Julie Christmas's vocals make this a lot more accessible, which I'm not sure is a good thing. Cult of Luna have succeeded in the past by giving that raw edge both in the instrumentation and the vocals. Not that Christmas's voice aren't edgy. They absolutely are. Her voice is this kind of maniacal shriek in the loud parts and a bit more of a belting female presence in the quieter parts. It just makes it seem more insane than demonic if you choose to discern the difference. Otherwise, this is a really, really solid Cult of Luna release.
Next up, we have an album from The Amazing. This one's called Ambulance. This is glum, kind of hazy indie rock. It has kind of a gothic 80s vibe to it, but not really in like a post-punk or electronic way. Something closer to like Tame Impala, Doves, or Belle and Sebastian if you made those bands much gloomier. I was really sold on this one by the end of it. It's really a solid batch of songs. Had actually one track, Moments Like These, that showed up on my favorites playlist for songs of the year.
And I actually, because it showed up on your list, that's what got me starting to listen to this album. Unfortunately, by the time that I this album really clicked with me, we had already essentially finalized our top albums list of the year, which kind of bums me out because this would have made my list. I can't put this thing down lately. I get a large Andrew Bird vibe, especially in the vocals. Also with some low with the general composition and the overall approach to the intensity or lack thereof. This is mellow acoustic guitar driven indie rock, so of course I'm gonna love it, Tom.
Yeah, makes sense.
Finger plucked acoustic guitar melodies cascade out to support beautiful reverb slathered male vocals that portray a fair amount of emotion. I really like this sound. These guys are really achieving something intimate and sparse while still incorporating enough specific, interesting ideas in the songwriting that each song develops and conveys a point. This is a great listen from start to finish, and I want to replay it as soon as it is over. Lastly, in our featured albums list that we missed from 2016, we have Xenia Rubinos with Black Terry Cat.
What is it going to take to make us feel safe when we got that whole world blown up anyway? When we're gonna all be dust in space. Did I get that right? 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 Did I get that right?
Xenia Rubinos is or All Music says, is a hard to classify singer-songwriter, lots of jazz influence, and this Black Terry Cat is her second studio album. And man, do I wish we would have gotten this one.
This is the one that definitely would have made our list.
This got away, and it would have been, and it probably would have made my top 10.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, I've gone back to it like 3 or 4 times in the past week, just out of pure desire to hear it. It has this really cool kind of bouncy soul / R&B, hip hop and funk and rock and electronica, and you know, kind of jazz going on in the rhythms. It just has this really interesting sound. It's a perfect blend of all the genres that I just mentioned, with even a little pop sheen to help make the songs incredibly catchy, but it's never overdone. This could have easily been one of the top albums of the year.
Well, that wraps up our featured honorable mentions, our featured albums from 2016 that we didn't get a chance to actually include in a wrap-up. Those are the ones that we really liked, felt passionate about, or felt like we had a lot to say about. So now we're going to jump into our honorable mentions from 2016. These are albums that we enjoyed overall, but maybe just didn't move us to the point where we felt like we had too much to say about them. So we're going to go a little rapid fire through these, mention the albums. You guys told us after our November wrap-up that you still would like to have the song clips here, so we will include those for context, but we probably just won't say as much about these. All right, we're going to start our honorable mentions with Rihanna, Anti.
Love in your direction, hoping that the message goes somewhere close to you.
Look, I'm never going to be a Rihanna mega fan, but I actually did have a lot of respect for what she did on this album, ditching the dance tropes and focusing on a sparser, darker, more experimental pop R&B sound.
Next up, Basement, Promise Everything.
Hanging around for a sign.
Driving, grinding guitar chords presented in warm, rocking sound. I really like the sound of these guys. They seem to know just how to balance between hook and edge.
Next up is an electronica album, Matmos, Ultimate Care 2. This is very textured, up-close sounding electronica and sample-based music. The beats are fairly loose, not too driving, not too structured, without a lot of melody holding it down. In fact, I'm actually impressed by how coherent it sounds, considering there's not really a true anchor in the music. This is just very artistic, craftily made electronica.
Next, we have Radical Face with The Family Tree. This is the third album in a 3-album series, The Roots, The Branches, The Leaves.
But it doesn't stop us running if a cow dies 1,000 times. Then there's a graveyard.
I have a soft spot in my heart for anything Radical Face does. Ben Cooper's songwriting has a way of cutting through every mental wall I've put up to deal with life and instantly makes me feel more human. The Leaves does this too. However, it's not to the same extent that The Branches of the Roots were able to achieve. I think that maybe because I have more personal experience with the predecessors, but also could be just due to some of the songwriting that's on The Leaves. This is good enough that I'll give it more listens.
Next up, we have Gnod, The Mirror. Gnod, G-N-O-D, is that how you pronounce it? It's dong backwards, if that helps anyone.
That helps me.
Okay. I don't want to know why. This is sludgy, droney post-punk. This is biting, has great attitude to it. Just a few tracks on this album total. The thing that makes it work to me is that the noisiness of the guitars are tactful and the vocals complement it rather than distract. The balance here is just great.
Next, we have Lucius with Good Grief.
Dusty trails can lead you to a golden road. I've been told. Can't remember who it was, but all she spoke.
This is really smart indie folk pop, and the harmonies, the vocal harmonies, are just great on this record, and that's what it is all about. Now, the song Dusty Trails made our top songs of 2016 list, and that song is amazing. No surprise, it ended up being one of the most impressive vocal performances on our list. The rest of the album before it, because it's the closing track on the record, doesn't quite live up to that promise that we hear on that song, but I still find it to be a highly enjoyable album.
Next up, we have Autolux, Pussy's Dead.
No one can move you. I see right through.
I love the gothic and quasi-industrial feel of the sound for these guys. It's like a dooming, plastic 2000s Radiohead. Normally, I'd be on this album's case about the lack of dynamics, as this never really feels like it gets above a 7 on the intensity scale. But actually, I really like the sedated, druggy feel of it. I think it complements the vocalist styles. So I'm not really sure how else they would do that. It was a good album.
Good job, Tom, filling our one Radiohead mention per podcast quota.
Oh, yes! I didn't even mean to do that. I feel like the gods would strike us down if we didn't do that.
The podcast would just implode.
It would.
Next, we have the Hotelier with Goodness. This is emo, but clean, somber emo, as opposed to a lot of the raucous stuff coming out these days. This stuff has great melodies with a lot of feeling, but I wanted a little bit more edge at times. Definitely worth revisiting.
Next up, we've got some metal. Vektor, Terminal Redux.
I was certain injustice. I set up the god. A rise into his was my
This is prog metal with somewhat high-pitched screamed vocals. The performances and the synchronization of the instrumentals are extremely impressive. For how long this album was, though, 73 minutes, it didn't really go enough places for me. Now, I know a lot of people were really loving this one, but I just want a little something different out of metal. But I do appreciate the lack of repetition and how truly progressive the writing was on this one.
Little Scream, cult following. This is really diverse indie pop. Reminds me of Wyoke at times, but less guitar focused and with more pop and sometimes a country influence. There are a ton of sparkle and X Factor delivered through the layered female vocals. I even get an Of Montreal vibe in the vocal presentation, coupled with funky electric guitar and synth keys. Really good stuff.
Next, we have the new Regina Spektor, Remember Us to Life.
He had spent it all and didn't even feel it. He had spent it all and didn't even feel it.
Regina Spektor never really disappoints, even though I didn't like this one quite as much as her last few. There are some great tunes on this album. My big complaint is that it felt a little bit unbalanced toward the sentimental ballad side of the scale. I think Regina is actually better and more believable when she's being playful, and those are the tracks here that work better. Not that the ballads are terrible, but I would have liked there to be maybe only like 3 of them, give or take, whereas it seems like most of the album is slower.
Following Regina, Nicolas Jaar with Sirens.
Just give us a smile. You're all right, set on automatic dial. Yeah, we're all just rolling. The mothers are sold. All the blood's hidden in the government drum.
This is really slick blending of several kinds of electronic music, ambient, glitch, an occasional jungle beat, industrial. I think this longer format works really well for Jaar. This is just a decent album overall.
Next up, we have Meshuggah, The Violent Sleep of Reason. As you might have been able to tell from the intonation I gave that band and the album title, this is an extreme prog metal band. They are heavy as hell, and this is pretty much what I'd expect from them. The album doesn't really excite me all that much. They just don't, for me, fit quite enough stylistic or dynamic variety into it. But I mean, when it comes to metal bands, these guys, what they've accomplished in their career is incredible, and this is just another addition to it.
Next up, we have a band you may have heard of before, the Rolling Stones, Blue and Lonesome. It's great to hear the Stones getting back to their blues roots. The performances here are terrific and vitalized. Even Mick Jagger sounds spot on. I love the dirty production, which fits this style perfectly.
Next up, we have 9 Inch Nails, Not the Actual Events. This is an EP. Came out right in the last week of 2016. This is probably some of the most experimental music I've ever heard from Trent. This comes at the sacrifice of some of the melody that he's known for. In other words, it's more interesting than it is enjoyable. But this is one of those EPs that to me indicates a direction more than it makes a statement on its own. So I'm looking forward to what he does next.
Next up, we have another December release with J. Cole, For Your Eyes Only.
Apologize if I'm harping again. I know these things happen often, but I'm back on the scene. I was lost in a dream as I write this a teen down in Austin. I've been building me a house back home in the South, ma. Won't believe what it's costing, and it's fit for a king, right? Or a nigga that can
J. Cole is a hip-hop artist who has a really great flow, and the choruses on this album are pretty damn bland and forgettable. He's going for more of this stripped-down trap sound that's really popular these days, instead of the bouncy and smooth aesthetic. There are moments of that old sound still here, but I feel at times it's like he's trying too hard to stay relevant rather than using his success to pave a new path for himself or hip-hop at a higher level. He's got the talent and the vocals and the delivery, he just isn't showing it here.
Next up, another artist that was topping a lot of people's lists, No Name with Telephone.
Like maybe I'ma miss you after autumn and all of the falling collars and ringers when stingers hitting my telly and telly page and my beeper. The reefer got me like, whoa, slow down.
This is female hip hop infused with a lot of soul. It's very soft and smooth, not too much intensity, but what a just diverse and creative artist No Name is. I'm looking forward to what she's going to do next.
Next, we have The Deer Hunter with Act 5. Like the Deer Hunter albums before Act 5, this is a long one. These guys are continuing their rock monolith in prog art rock fashion that rivals bands such as Coheed and Cambria and Cloud Cult. The vocalist conveys so much theatric emotion. He carries and dictates the intensity of each song, both in volume and in emotion. Most of the songs consist of squelching electric guitar, driving bass, crafted drum work, and big backing vocals for the choruses. It's so theatrical and concept-fueled that it's really hard to truly understand, let alone fall in love with, without having an intricate knowledge of the story. As far as the music goes, I dig it.
Next up, we have Jeff Rosenstock with Worry. This is raucous indie rock with kind of an acoustic punk feel like Andrew Jackson Jihad, only a bit less snarky and more approachable. Some of these tracks were actually more like legitimate pop punk. It's just a really endearing style. I think Jeff Rosenstock pulls it off well. Next up, we have an album by Street Sects. This is End Position. This is a band on the Flenser, the record label that Have a Nice Life is on. We're both big fans of that band. Kind of a cool underground experimental metal noise label. And this band certainly fits that. This is like a hellish mix of Big Black, Ministry, and Juju to me. If you like those artists, check this out. It's abrasive as can be, but somehow not difficult to listen to. This was a really cool album.
Next, we have Kevin Morby with Singing Saw. This is a diverse singer-songwriter with Dylan-esque vocals and an indie rock aesthetic. It's a terrific attention of detail, and throughout this record, a lot of great subtlety in the mix and arrangement. The songs are a bit hit or miss for me, but this is really good overall.
And last but certainly not least, our last album of our Honorable Mentions podcast, Japanese Breakfast, Psychopomp. This is glittery, poppy, smooth shoegaze. I like the sound here more than the songwriting, but that's not to say the songwriting's bad. It's pretty endearing, pretty interesting stuff. There's a lot of good stuff going on here. This is one of those albums I liked all right, but I'm more interested in what these guys are doing next.
Well, Tom, that puts the bow on 2016.
It does.
No more 2016 albums, unless we cover one someday in the future in an artist deep dives or genre deep dives.
Yeah,
but that's probably a ways off.
Yeah.
Probably a ways off. Did you know, Tom, that maybe not on the podcast directly, but we cumulatively listened to 464 different 2016
Holy
records?
Crap.
Isn't that nuts?
Good.
That's
good.
a lot. And I feel like we barely scratched the surface.
Dude, there's so much coming out.
It's relentless. Every single Friday. Actually, 2017 so far, almost nothing's come out.
Yeah.
Brian Eno had an album come out.
Yeah, that's true.
But we're going to have to listen to a lot of music this year. I'm excited to listen to a lot of music this year. Hopefully this year. I did feel that there were some key albums that we covered today in the Misses and Honorable Mentions podcast that we did miss that I would have liked to have included. So I'm going to try. I think we're going to have to figure out some way to make sure that we, our net doesn't let a few of these fall through.
A big part of it is you guys.
Yeah.
Don't let us off the hook.
Right.
If there's something we miss, you guys got to throw it at us.
Yep.
We want to hear it from everyone because we want to make sure it gets on our list.
Also, tell us the albums that you're anticipating coming out in the next few weeks before we do the monthly wrap-ups. We'd love to hear what albums you're really jacked about. Speaking of which, Tom, got any albums you're excited about in 2017?
Elbow is coming
yeah.
out soon. The Flaming Lips is coming out with one soon. I mean, there are a lot that I'm sure are going to be projected further out in the year, but as far as like January and February goes, those are two I'm really looking forward to.
I've heard rumors about a Gorillaz album.
Ooh.
Also, the
Hope
Shins.
that actually happens.
The Shins are going to...
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
New Shins.
and Port of Morrow just didn't cut it for me, so I'm really excited for a new Shins record.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for your continued support and participation. Tom and I love all of your comments on our YouTube videos, your Facebook messages, and emails to us. Your participation is what makes Velocities in Music possible. So, as always, thank you for being awesome. I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
We are Velocities in Music, moving music discussion forward.